All right, joining me now, Senator Roger Marshall. Welcome to the Alec Lace Show.
Look, I'm glad to be with you. Looking forward to it. We got so many topics to go. I'm curious where we're going to start.
Well, put your track shoes on. We're going to go through them fast. Let's start here. Trump's getting win after win here. The biggest thorn in his side has been these activist judges who somehow think that they're the ones that were elected overwhelmingly by the American people, but they weren't. They're a big roadblock. And one of the things you're doing now, you're working on something with Senator Grassley to try to rein in these activist judges. Talk to me about that if you could.
Yeah, we would love to. Think about this. These federal judges typically, like we have one federal judge for all of Kansas. But so they're what the left does, they find an activist judge that will rule in their favor. And then this court order impacts the entire nation. And that was not what the district courts were meant to be. I love what Senator Grassley's done right now. And if your listeners don't know Senator Grassley, they should. He might be the wisest sage in all of America right now. He's been in the Senate since 1972, I believe, somewhere around then. So he came in with Jimmy Carter, believe it or not, in the House, and then with President Reagan in the Senate side. He's the head of the Judiciary Committee, but what I like is he's not a lawyer. He's a common sense person who's been up here for decades and understands how can we push back against these federal judges that have become activists. And I think his bill does just that. It puts some guardrails around them to say, hey, if this decision impacts more than just your district, you're a district judge here, then you shouldn't be ruling on it. And if you do, let's make that immediately appealable to I assume the circuit appellate courts.
Yeah, because it seems like how could one judge in, say, Kansas control what's going to happen with people with the rest of the nation? How is it going to impact that? That's a lot of power for these lower courts to have. And it just seems like this only happens against President Trump because when you look at the injunctions that have happened against previous presidents, Trump he's tripled the amount that they've had, and already just this year, not even 100 days yet, he's already had more than the previous president.
Yeah, I think it's like up to 15 or something like that. I think there's one more really good point that we need to talk about, though, is 240 Democrats are on record saying they don't like this either. You may recall that one of the federal judges stopped the abortion pill in various ways recently, and 240 Democrats reached out and said, hey, we can't have this judge being an activist judge from the right saying to stop the abortion pills going nationwide. So they're either going to be hypocrites or they're going to hop on board and let us pass this.
Yeah, and is there a pathway to try to? What is the status on trying to either impeach the activist judges, maybe defund them? Is there any other actions that we could take against them?
Well, look, I think impeaching's a pretty tall road to get across. It would take 66, 67 votes in the Senate, and frankly, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I think this is a much better way to do it. I think that if the Supreme Court's not going to do its job and clip these people's wings, that's what should happen. The Supreme Court should come out right now and clip the wings on these federal judges and put some guardrails around them. If they're not going to, I think this legislation is the best way. It should have I bet it will have some type of a committee hearing in the Judiciary Committee. Let the fireworks start and let's get the Democrats on record in that committee and then go from there.
Yeah, well said, Senator. And it's interesting because one of the Supreme Court justices wasn't able to answer a question that President Trump was able to answer on Friday last week. I was there at the White House. One of the new correspondents there asked him a question, "What is a woman?" And he was able to answer that question. And it's like, wow, it's so difficult for even a Supreme Court justice to be able to answer that. And Trump was able to bang it right out. And you got the defining Men and Women Act. It's amazing that we even need something like this to happen. But explain to me what this Defining Men and Women Act is.
Yeah, so what this act does is codify, put into law what President Trump did to define a man and a woman. Look, if you make spermatozoa, then you're a dude, you're a guy. If you make oocytes, if you make eggs, then you're a woman. It's that simple. And you may know this, but I was an obstetrician. I delivered a baby nearly every day of my life for 30 years. And that the big moment of the whole pregnancy was delivering that baby, waiting for it to cry, and then handing that baby to those parents and saying, it's a boy, it's a girl. And then I filled out the birth certificate later that day or the next day. And I to your point, I couldn't imagine I'd be up here having to redefine what man and what women are. But really what this is about, though, this is why it's important. We need to protect women's rights, women's safety, and women's dignity.
Yeah.
And I think that we often talked about the first two, but the dignity, I think, is something that's not talked about enough, that no one can look me in the eye and say they're perfectly comfortable with biological boys showering with 16-year-old biological girls. No one can look me in the eye with a straight face and say that's okay.
Yeah, well said, Senator. And I've had that blessing 4 times in my life. You know, we have 4 kids ourselves, and I've had that experience of it's a boy, and you know, it's the greatest gift you can get on this planet. And so it's awesome to see that. And again, it's crazy that we have to do this, but you even have one of the members of Congress that's parading around in a female costume. And I know Congressman Self, you know, referred to, you know, use the wrong pronoun. They throw this big hissy fit and try. It's like, why are we putting on this whole act and this whole stage when everybody involved, including the people on the other side, know what reality really is?
Yeah, and you think about this. Some say President Trump is doing a really good job of identifying 80-20 issues. I think this is a 90-10 issue.
Yeah.
And you know, when you're in a hole, the first thing you need to do is stop digging. But my friends across the aisle continue to dig deeper and deeper and deeper on this. They won't give in. And I've given that some thought why. And I'd be interested in your take on this, but I think it's because their donor class has embraced this issue. And the Democrats are afraid to come out and say, enough, this is nonsense. We were wrong. You were right, because their donor class might shut off some of their funding. That's all I can figure out.
Well, I do believe, Senator, that when we see the 2028 cycle rolling around, they're going to drop this issue. I think they know it's a loser, and I think the problem with that is going to be for these people that they've duped, especially the young kids that have permanently damaged their body and won't be able to procreate. That, you know, their lives are going to be destroyed. And when the Democrats drop them like a wet banana, all of a sudden there's going to be nobody there to pick up the pieces for these kids, and they're going to realize how much damage they've done, and they can't go back and reset the clock. And they've done more harm than good to so many people. And you have a lot of these parents who I think their pronouns are me, and they parade around these trans kids, and I think they've destroyed so many lives because of it.
Yeah, you're spot on. You know, I took care of so many different women, and a common visit to my office was a mom or an aunt bringing in their 15, 16-year-old daughter to have a little discussion about the consequences of promiscuity, right? Sexually transmitted diseases, pregnancy. And I would say, you know, number one is, I don't care, you know, what side of the railroad track you were from, STDs don't care. And we would have this discussion about, look, try to get through life without any type of get through adolescence without permanent damage. And here we have doctors and parents out there, and in some cases, doctors in schools not even wanting to inform the parents. These surgeries are irreversible. The kids do end up with unable to have children in the future. And I just absolutely think they're going to have remorse. And there's probably some type, with all due respect, there's probably some type of underlying psychological issues going on. And I want to help these adolescents. It's a tough time to raise a kid. It's a tough time to be an adolescent in this country. I'm the first to admit that. I want to help them out, but for crying out loud, let's not do anything permanent that cannot be reversed. And by the way, these surgeries are going to cause chronic scar tissue and chronic pain as well.
It's a tragedy. And, you know, it's even forced us as parents. Like, my youngest is my only girl. She's 10. And we've already had these conversations because she has kids in her class talking about transgenders. And I'm like, man, 10 years old, you're talking about a transgender. Like, what the heck has happened here? And it's just, they've forced us to have these conversations we'd rather not have to have with 10-year-old, you know, girls about this stuff, about boys playing in women's sports and about transitioning their bodies. And they forced us into a very unnecessary position to do this. But it's conversations now we have to have.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, folks would used to ask me, when is the proper time to have the birds and the bees talk with their kids? And my typical answer was, when they're ready. And they'll give you clues. They're inquisitive. They'll, you know, for us out on the farm, it was an easy conversation when calves were being born or something like that. It's a good time to start talking about creation and the sanctity of human life, all those types of things. But it is a tragedy what's happening in our schools, and really this is being forced. Grooming, call it whatever you want to, but this is not an issue that 10-year-old boys and girls should have to even be considering.
Yeah, no way. And I think a big problem with this too, and something I harp on a lot on this show, and it's been a big part of what I do, is the fatherless crisis that we have in the country. We've had a breakdown of the nuclear families. And so you have kids growing up without a father influence or a male influence in their life. And these conversations, these things spiral out of control when you don't have that intact nuclear family. And that adds to this epidemic that we're seeing. And I think if we could heal our nuclear families and give us a foundation again, I think a lot of these issues would go away and handle themselves.
Yeah, Alex, my son and I just had the same talk yesterday. He just spent a year overseas in the Army. He came back, and He's kind of figuring out who America is right now. And he said, Dad, how did we get here? What was it because they introduced birth control pills? He had one other sentinel moment too in America's history. I can't remember what it was. Is that what caused it? But then finally he said, my gosh, Dad, this is really about the lack of fathers. And I said, Cal, I know my son, you're right. When I started my practice, there was almost always a dad. The couple were married. By the time I was ending my practice, too many times, there was not even a father of the baby in the room. And he was talking about, well, does Medicaid contribute to this? Do all these social programs that are out there contribute to fathers of the baby not doing what we're supposed to do as fathers? The most important thing we do, I think, of course, is your spiritual relationship with God. But I think the next thing is raising children, a marriage, raising children. And that's, to me, I think was the second most important thing in my life.
Yeah, and to that point, that they've also removed the Heavenly Father from our society. So you took the Heavenly Father out of our culture, and you took the father out of the home, and that combination has really crippled our country.
Yeah. To me, I talk about the pillars of my life being faith, family, and community. Without faith, without a God in our lives, we don't have values. And I think that's why it's so important. And again, let's just go back and teach the real history. Our forefathers, for the most part, were God-fearing people. And, the Bible was the grammar book that we used as well. So it's always interesting. I walk into the halls of Congress and I see behind where the speaker sits, it says, "In God we trust." And you look on the other direction, and there's Moses overseeing the House floor. The greatest lawmaker of all times was Moses. So he's still alive and well here in Congress, in the building, but we're not letting that light shine like we should.
Yeah, well said, Senator. I just want to get a comment if I could, because I know Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth just stated now that they're going to implement military standards being the same for men and women, because this has been a topic of discussion about women in combat, and it's saying as long as the standards don't change. Like, I've interviewed a ton of Navy SEALs and other special operations forces. Their biggest fear is that you're going to lower the standards to help women get into this combat, and it's going to also lower the standards for men, and you're going to change the whole dynamic of what we have in our most lethal fighting force. So I know you've served, and thank you for your service. So what's your kind of take on what he's doing there?
Yeah. So number one, I think there is a job in the military for every man and woman, but not every man and woman can do every job in the military. There are guys that shouldn't be Navy SEALs, and they don't let them in, right? Yeah. And there's girls that I assume could be Navy SEALs, but when you're in that situation, when your life is on the line, when your platoon's life is on the line, you really have to be able to do the task in front of you. And again, I'm grateful for all the women that are serving. There's some incredible, the women pilots, there's women pilots today that are better than any men, astronauts. There's so many jobs that women do better than many guys do. So there's a place for everybody, but not everybody gets every place. The military is not a place to hand out participation awards.
Yeah, really well said, Senator. And from a guy who hasn't served at all, I appreciate everybody's service, men and women. I just, I know we wouldn't stand a chance on this planet without you guys. So I'm always grateful for the service. And as a civilian, as an American, I want the most lethal fighting force that we have to defend us. So let me get a take here, if I could, on the SHORT Act, because this is something too that you have introduced. And it's Stop Harassing Owners of Rifles Today. A friend of the show here, Congressman Andrew Clyde, is on board here with you. So explain to me here, run this down, the SHORT Act.
Right. So we just want to protect our constitutional rights. I believe the Second Amendment is what protects the First Amendment. The Biden administration was trying to take away short rifles and pistol braces, if you can believe that or not. And why a short rifle is so important. If you would take a group of women and say, here's your choices to defend your house with. Here's a 45 caliber pistol. Here's a 9mm. Here's a shotgun. Here's a short rifle. 9 out of 10 will choose this short rifle. It's much more accurate than a pistol. It's not as loud. It's easier to handle. In a place where I come from, usually we'll have one sheriff or one deputy on call. They're 60 minutes away most of the time, and we have to be able to defend ourselves. So we're just trying to protect our access to these short rifles. Look, President Trump's going to protect it, but we want to protect it for future generations as well.
Yeah, and this would change the way it's classified in the NFA, the National Firearms Act. And I know a lot of people calling to just repeal that act altogether. Any possibility? What's your thoughts on that?
Boy, I wish we could. I think I have to be a realist here. Again, that's going to take 60 votes in the Senate. That's going to be a tough battle. Now, who knows? If we come out and sweep 7 more seats in the Senate, maybe we can, but maybe we can pick it off one piece at a time and at least, shine a light on the situation and help bring attention to the matter.
Yeah, well said, Senator. And last thing I want to hit on here too, obviously, like you said, you've been a physician for a great part of your life, and right now we have the MAHA movement here, Make America Healthy Again. RFK Jr. Implementing so many different aspects, and again, they're trying to stop him at every stage of the game too, as well. So, what is your take on what RFK Jr. is bringing to the table here with the Make America Healthy Again movement?
Yeah, I'm so excited. Again, I've been working on this for over 40 years, and what an opportunity we have. So 60% of Americans have a chronic disease of some type. One of the solutions is getting ahead of it. How do we prevent these chronic diseases? I think it starts with nutrition. So we're going to be working with agriculture for more soil health, trying to grow more nutritious foods. The emphasis is on the quality of the nutrition, not just the calories. Bringing whole milk back into our schools, and we certainly want less ultra processed foods. Think about this for your listeners. Try to go a day without opening a package to eat. 60-70% of our calories in America from ultra-processed food. It's the salt, it's the sugar, it's the starch in those ultra-processed food that's the problem. So there's things we can do, whether it's in the food stamp programs or the Meals on Wheels, senior citizen meals. We can start doing those with federal dollars, but I think really it's a movement. And there's a groundswell of MAHA moms out there that support this as well. I think it starts with good research, trying to figure out what's healthy and what's not, redoing the dietary guidelines, and then sharing that information, empowering local communities to solve this problem.
Yeah, it's so important because it's one thing to give people, underprivileged people. We know that and I don't want to get into that, but the welfare system, I think, is way over bloated and stuff like that too. But, people that don't have access to the food, it's one thing to give them access, but it's another thing to give them a healthy choice here on what they're doing. So that way we don't have to take care of them on the health end with the health issues on the back end. So we're getting it on the front end, giving them the food, and then taking care of them on the back end with the medical issues.
You nailed it. So our spending on Medicaid has went up 50% in 5 years. And basically that's because America is getting sicker and sicker and sicker. So if we go into that Medicaid population or a Medicare population and get in front of it, we can prevent the need for these new miracle diet drugs. And they are miracles, what they can do with them for the diabetes and weight loss. But let's try to prevent it in the first place. Nutrition alone can help impact hypertension along with the diabetes and a host of other problems, orthopedic problems. So it is getting ahead of the problem. I envision community health centers. There's 32 of them in the state of Kansas already. I look around, federally funded community health centers. Let's bring in the food banks. Let's bring in the WIC programs. I know several grocery store chains have apps that you can start making some better choices with as well. I envision nurse coaches in these community health centers sitting down with people and really doing some education, but mostly encouraging and teaching, cooking classes, kind of a holistic approach here to redoing nutrition in America.
Yeah, awesome stuff. My time is up. Senator Marshall, great to have you on the podcast. Love to have you on again back down the line. Thanks for giving me a few minutes of your time today on the Alec Lace Show.
You bet. Marshall.senate.gov or at Roger Marshall MD. Sign up for our newsletter. Learn something new every week at Roger Marshall MD. Thanks.
I got the link down in the description below. Thank you, Senator.
So much.